Naming no names, a lot of TV shows and movie franchises have used the pandemic as an excuse for either lower production values, slower production rates, or reduced amount of output. This is totally understandable, of course, because COVID just did make producing movies and TV much harder and much riskier than usual. Scheduling is a nightmare to begin with, and an on-set outbreak could shut things down for months at a time. God knows I would not want to be working in risk assessment during a pandemic. However, the BBC's resident narrative tricksters, Reece Shearsmith and Steve Pemberton, and their casts and crew of anthology show Inside Number 9 haven't slowed down at all. They've put out 6 episodes of the most innovative comedy and drama that British television has ever seen every year throughout the pandemic, and their latest batch, Series 7, is probably their best to date. Of course, the format means that it was probably easier to work around COVID than most large-scale productions, being a show themed around small casts, usually set inside one location. Although Series 7 is notably more ambitious than usual, probably taking advantage of that brief period before Omicron happened. Unfortunately, it's now been commissioned for Series 8 and Series 9, and then it has to end. No, really, it has to. I love Inside Number 9, it's one of the best shows ever, but it must be 9 series long. No more, no less, and trying for a 10th would just be weird. Anyway, so let's talk about it. The first episode, Merrily, is set outdoors. You'd think this would go against the entire premise of the show being inside Number 9, but the boat is still called Number 9, and it still confines our characters inside theoretical walls out on a lake. So a group of old friends who've drifted apart meet up to go on a pedal boat, and one of them is notably Mark Gatiss, formerly of Shearsmith and Pemberton's previous writing and performance partnership, The League of Gentlemen. And one of them has brought along a girlfriend who no one likes, played by Diane Morgan, who pretty much everyone watching this video will know as Philomena Kunk. And if you don't, type the words Philomena Kunk into the search bar right now. You'll thank me later.
King Arthur came a lot, didn't he?
The character work in Inside Number 9 is pretty much unparalleled. Shearsmith, Pemberton and Gatiss already have their chemistry as performers well established, and Morgan is the perfect actress to throw into the mix to upset the natural order of things, as there is no one who does annoying side characters like her. As well as having the metatextual element of her essentially crashing the League of Gentlemen reunion, the fact it's set on a stuck boat in the middle of a freezing cold lake where no one can leave means that even though it's outside, it's more claustrophobic than ever. Especially when Reece's character starts revealing bits and pieces of uncomfortable truths that he's hidden from his old friends until now. There's a cathartic sense of fun that you get from watching these people who have a history but don't really seem to like each other that much anymore having a terrible afternoon in the miserable British countryside. I did really enjoy this one, but the ending didn't quite work for me. I was enjoying it more on the level of it being a claustrophobic dark comedy with bittersweet undertones, and the ending where it ventures more into horror territory didn't really hit as hard for me as this really sweet scene here where Reece's character talks to a picture of his deceased wife. Reece really is a phenomenal actor, and in this series he delivers some of his best work to date. Next up we have Mr. King, which is honestly one of my new favourite episodes ever. A lot of this is very personal and unique to me because, as everyone who watches my channel on a regular basis knows, I have a fascination with horror set at schools. And pretty much every aspect of this school feels twisted and wrong right from the start. So Reece is a teacher who's moved to a school in a small village in the countryside where there's something off about the children and the headmaster, who's a flamboyant character who feels like he stepped right out of Royston Vasey. The more this teacher gets to know the children, the more he begins to suspect that something sinister is going on behind closed doors, and there are all these subtle references to child abuse, of which this new teacher himself accidentally slips in a joke about Michael Jackson, which then leads to a troubled girl accusing him of indecent behaviour. It's a genius work of paranoia. You're never quite sure at any point where this is going, but you can tell this guy is being gaslit, not just by the children, but the head teacher as well. Such a warm and bright and colourful setting makes it appear as if it's a safe environment, and that's what makes it so unnerving because you know that something's not right with it. And the children are all completely perfect. Child characters are notoriously hard to get right on film because child actors are so young and lacking in acting experience, but giving them this disturbing class presentation where we reveal the folk horror plot that's been hiding in plain sight the entire time is just perfect, because the delivery of this horrific backstory is believably poorly delivered. It feels like a genuine class assembly, which is what makes it feel more unsettling. And the cinematography is just some of the finest I've seen in this show, just a work of pure brilliance all round. Next up we have Nine Lives Cat, which is the only episode of this series that I didn't really like that much. It's clever, sure, and it's got an interesting concept, but as entertainment, you have to really care about the subject to derive much enjoyment from it, because there's no other level on which you can hook yourself into it. So a cliched, flawed, alcoholic female detective inhabits all the trappings of a bog-standard airport thriller. She wanders through spare and underpopulated sets talking about this case before we reveal that she's actually the underdeveloped protagonist being written by a novelist. But then we reveal that he is also being written by a more literary writer who's writing a story about a writer of cliched commercial fiction. As a writer myself, I did relate to it really hard. I'm currently writing a novel about a man who's got lost in a country that he's never heard of before, and when you're knee-deep in navigating a fictional piece through the eyes of a character, you can end up feeling lost, haunted, and trapped by something that you yourself have created, because you're trying to channel the character's emotions. And if your character feels lost in the narrative, you can too. Nine Lives Cat asks you to look at the world from the perspective of a character whose environment has barely been fleshed out, and it wants you to think about how a character would feel about being given up on. While that's interesting and I appreciate the concept, that's also kind of the problem. Being composed of unfleshed, underdeveloped characters, I didn't really have anyone likeable showcasing raw emotions to hook myself onto. I personally think it would have worked better as a piece of experimental prose than a half-hour episode of television. Next up we got Kidnap, another rare occasion where we go outside the Inside Number 9 setting. Daisy Haggard, who some of you may know as Miri Matheson from Back to Life, or at least you should, get on it now, plays the wife of a cold, distant, rich husband, and she's kidnapped to extort money from him. Or so it seems. It recontextualises everything when it gets revealed that she's actually working with one of the kidnappers who she's been having an affair with, and they want to get the money from her husband so they can run away and start a new life together. This is one of those episodes where it experiments with the presentation, because most of it is told through split screen. Scenes in the kidnap location and the husband's office with the police play out simultaneously, and the action and dialogue will intersect at certain points. Like in Merrily, it technically breaks the series' rule of being inside Number 9, but the use of split screen is done to explore how the events inside and outside the Number 9 inform each other while also being rigidly separated. Basically, the screen itself ends up becoming this episode's Number 9. Two sets of characters are essentially trapped on different sides of the screen, being affected by events on the other side that they have no control over. And it makes for a clever and engaging thriller that's actually more efficient at delivering twists than you'd expect. By having this setup, the viewer may feel like they're the only one that has a complete picture of all the action, but it still manages to surprise you when twists happen to one half the characters while the others remain oblivious. There's a power in this episode's use of misdirection, where you're watching one half of the screen for clues as to where the story's going when you should be looking at the other side. That said, it can be quite hard to keep up with. I will admit that I did have to watch the ending twice to make sure that I actually got what had happened. It's a fun thriller though. Next episode is A Random Act of Kindness, and the thing it put me in mind of most was Netflix's Dark. It's an intimate family drama that gets punctuated with foreshadowing of a sci-fi revelation that comes along towards the end. A Random Act of Kindness is up there with Mr. King as one of the highlights of this season, and a lot of that is down to Jessica Hines as Helen, who gives a gut-wrenching performance as a beleaguered single mother who's just trying so damn hard to do right by her teenage son before being hit with a diagnosis of a terminal illness. I felt the relationship between the mother and the son was very real. The kid might come across as needlessly argumentative and disdainful of her, but it's a believable disdain that you'd expect of a teenager in a distressing family situation. This is why it gets away with it when it suddenly becomes a sci-fi piece in the last act, when the apparently well-meaning stranger Bob reveals that he's actually the kid from the future. Under other circumstances this twist might feel jarring, but the intimacy that's been fostered with the characters keeps you right on the edge of your seat, hoping that everything works out for them. And what I love so much about this is it's symbolic of how this show's mission statement has always been to use a small amount of space and a small cast of characters to showcase big emotions and big important events. Such small things like a bird hitting a window and a well-meaning stranger with an interesting quirky speech tick end up having huge implications on not just these characters' lives but the entire future of mankind. And that's why it getting revealed to actually be a time travel story does make sense, because the way small events affect the future has been the essence of time travel stories throughout the history of the genre. And finally we come to the last episode of the series, Wise Owl. Which Just fucking Wise Owl, oh my god. I was totally floored by Wise Owl. It's the new gold standard in not just this show, but in all of television for me. Okay, if you haven't seen it, in a nutshell, it uses a pastiche of children's public information cartoons from the 70s to hide the backstory of our main character wandering around a house full of taxidermified animals. And if that sounds like your sort of thing, stop this video right here and go and watch it. Because even if you don't normally care about spoilers, trust me, you do not want this thing spoiled. Okay, go away now, right? Right, you gone? Okay, hopefully everyone left watching has seen it, right? Okay, wow, was that fucking powerful, right? Everyone has always said that children's public information films from the 70s were horrible, creepy and ripe for horror, but what they've done here is they haven't just made some creepy fake public information films from the 70s and made a YouTube creepypasta out of them. There's thousands of fake episodes and fake shows that people talk about on the internet to scare each other, like Happy Appy, Squidward Suicide, Suicide Mouse, etc. But what they've done here is create a fake show and tied these cartoons directly into a character that you spend most of the runtime with. The victim of his paedophile father who voiced the character of Wise Owl. Splicing all these sequences of the victim who's now grown up and still processing what happened to him and his little sister's death from his father's negligence is what makes this such an effective piece about a fake old TV show. Wise Owl is a really intimate piece. Ronnie doesn't have much dialogue and he's very quiet and reserved, and he doesn't let on as to what actually happened until we have it confirmed to us via an animated sequence at the exact right moment. You're just watching his body language for most of it and trying to figure him out, and honestly, Reece Shearsmith is just one of the finest actors I've ever seen. He just plays this role with such delicacy, and that's what gives it its power. I was partly expecting Ronnie to stab his father at the end, but I felt it was right that he didn't. Pulling that final punch and then walking away to tell everything made it so much more devastating. And Ron Cook's performance as the father is equally strong. In a post-Jimmy Savile environment, it's quite hard to have a northern character who was a children's entertainer and not make it blatantly obvious that he was a paedophile until the moment that the show wants you to know that. You may have had an inkling, but the show wants you to just be guessing it right up until the moment where it makes it clear what happened. Oh, and this moment here where they show you the way he used his character's catchphrase on his son was beyond chilling.
Ronnie, you mustn't say anything. Wise Owl won't let you.
And we must always do what Wise Owl says, mustn't we?
So, yeah, I was just floored by this episode. God knows what Inside Number 9 is going to do next, but if it's a tenth as good as Wise Owl, I'm sold already.